Mom excluded me from Thanksgiving, so I invited everyone else to my $5 million ranch, and then the calls began. 6 words from my mother shouldn't have cut so deep, but they ripped open every year I'd been invisible at the kids' table. So I did what daughters do when being ignored becomes tradition. I built my own table, 30 chairs, 1 fire, no kids section. By sunset, my Blue Ridge Lodge roared with cousins, laughter and music. But at dawn, my phone lit up. Mom, Dad, my golden boy brother. And when I hit speaker, my grandmother's voice shattered the silence. Stay. You'll want to hear exactly what she said. The message came in at 2:14 on a grey Wednesday afternoon. My office overlooked the Hudson, glass stretching floor to ceiling, skyline smudged by mist. I'd been skimming a contract, half-heartedly chasing through legal jargon, when my phone lit up with a notification from Mom. 6 words, no greeting, no signature, just Mark's family this year. I read it once, then again. My stomach dropped like the elevator cables had snapped. My chair suddenly felt too big, my office too hollow. The words weren't just a note about a holiday, they were the echo of a lifetime. I could see, as if the river outside were a mirror, every time I'd been forgotten before. Birthdays blurred together, like the year I turned 12 and no one remembered until 2 days later. Dad brought home a store-bought cake and said we'd make up for it. But it never felt like mine. Or the Thanksgiving when I was 22 and still seated at the folding table with the cousins' kids while Mark carved turkey under chandelier light. He beamed, they bragged, I shrank. Mark, my older brother by 3 years, was the golden one. The quarterback in high school, the hometown son who never left Indiana, who took over Dad's equipment shop and married Becky, the head cheerleader. 3 children, 2 golden retrievers, and the glow of perfection polished daily by my parents. He could mow the lawn and they'd say he invented grass. Me? I was the strange one who chased computers and logistics, too abstract, too far away to count. The text reminded me of every dinner where my words were clipped off mid-sentence so someone could praise Mark's sales numbers. Every photo where I was edged to the side while he stood tall in the centre. Even the Christmas card they mailed one year without me. Just Mark, Becky and the kids in matching sweaters with my parents beside them, as if I had never been born. I leaned back, phone heavy in my hand, and thought about that garage in Fort Wayne. I used to spend hours in there, hunched over dead radios and battered computers salvaged from Goodwill. Soldering irons burned my fingers. Wires hummed faintly when I managed to coax a spark. While Mark was at football camp, I was coaxing life from broken circuits. The garage was my cathedral, the place where discarded things found breath again. I didn't know it then, but I was learning how to stitch together what others had already given up on. That habit had followed me into adulthood, into my company, into everything I built. Yet to my family, it never mattered. Mom would look up from her magazine and say, "That's nice, honey," before pivoting back to talk about Mark's next touchdown or Becky's parents' pride. I learned to tuck my excitement down, fold it quiet. Invisible daughters become experts at silence. Now here I was, 39 years old, CEO turned ex-CEO, sitting in a corner office that overlooked the river. I had signed deals with hospital systems, built predictive algorithms that kept ventilators and blood bags moving when the world froze. I had hustled through nights, drank too much burnt coffee, nearly lost everything twice. And still, with millions in the bank and a skyline view, a text from my mother could split me wide open. I set the phone flat on my desk, closed my eyes. I told myself I wouldn't beg. Not again. Not for a seat at a table I was never meant to occupy. My thumb hovered, then I typed a single word. Enjoy. Sent. That was all the space they would get. As if fate wanted to twist the knife, another notification pinged almost immediately. An email this time. Subject line, acquisition complete. I clicked, skimmed, and felt my pulse stumble. The wire transfer had landed. The deal was official. I had just sold my logistics company for a sum that could carry me through 3 lifetimes. There it was, the contradiction, so sharp it almost made me laugh. I had everything I once thought I wanted: success, security, proof that the girl soldering scraps in the garage had built something no one could ignore. And yet, in the same breath, I was still the daughter left out of Thanksgiving dinner. I turned my chair back to the window, watched a cargo ship churn downriver, and felt the ache deepen. Triumph in one hand, rejection in the other. I could taste the irony, bitter and metallic. The deal proved I was not invisible to the world, but the text proved I was still invisible to them. And for the first time I wondered, maybe the solution wasn't chasing their table at all. Maybe it was building one of my own. Chairs. That's what it always came down to. Who sat where? Who was centered in the glow of the chandelier? Who was pushed to the folding table in the corner? A chair wasn't just wood and cushion, it was recognition. A chair said, "You belong here." And the absence of one said just as clearly, "You don't." I learned that young. Thanksgiving after Thanksgiving, Mark's seat at the head of the table might as well have been carved into stone. Dad at the other end, Mum to his right, Becky on his left once she entered the family. I floated around the edges, perched between restless cousins, knees jammed under flimsy plastic, forced to balance paper plates. Even when I was old enough to drive home from college, the chair reserved for me was still at the kids' table. One Christmas, the truth was printed in glossy ink. The family card arrived late in my New York mailbox. I tore it open, expecting, hoping to see myself included. Instead, there they were. Mark, Becky, the children in matching green sweaters, my parents beside them in coordinated plaid, their smiles wide, their posture proud, and me, absent, as if I didn't exist. No note, no apology, just a photo mailed to prove who mattered most. I pinned it to my refrigerator for months, not because I wanted to see it, but because it reminded me not to expect more than I'd been given. I told myself it was easier that way. Low expectations meant fewer disappointments, but not everyone played by those rules. A week later, another envelope arrived. No return address, just my name in looping cursive. Inside was a single Christmas card with a snow-dusted chapel on the front. And inside, in shaky handwriting, "Always remember, you're my girl too. Love, Grandma Evelyn." It was barely more than a sentence, but it cracked something open. Someone had noticed my absence. Someone had cared enough to slip me a separate reminder that I was seen. That tiny card lived in my nightstand for years, tucked between textbooks and later between contracts and pitch notes. I read it whenever I felt myself shrinking. Evelyn's words were proof that invisibility wasn't absolute. That one voice, even whispered, could steady me against the silence. Now, decades later, with my phone still warm from Mom's 6-word text, I felt the old ache sharpen. All those years, and nothing had changed. Success hadn't rewritten the family script. Money hadn't bought me a seat at their table. I was still the afterthought, the empty chair they didn't bother to pull out. I swiveled away from the river view and faced the truth head on. Chasing their recognition was a battle I could never win. If 100 birthdays, degrees and contracts hadn't shifted my place, nothing ever would. But maybe that was the wrong fight. Maybe the mistake had been believing their table was the only one that mattered. Maybe I needed to stop begging for a chair and start building my own. The thought lit something electric in my chest. I could see it. Wood beams, one long table, every seat filled with people who knew the sting of being overlooked. Cousins excluded for convenience. Friends whose stories never fit the family mould. Neighbours who had no table of their own. I wanted them all there. I wanted the fire crackling, laughter spilling across plates, and not one person relegated to a corner. Recognition wouldn't come from squeezing myself into their frame. It would come from making space wide enough for others like me. I stood, restless energy buzzing through me, and crossed to the window again. The Hudson shimmered faintly in the winter light, cargo ships crawling south. My reflection stared back, older, sharper, but still that garage girl who pieced together broken things. Maybe this was my greatest repair yet, not a circuit board, not a company, but the fractured idea of family itself. Mum's 6 words had shut one door, but in their echo I felt another door swing wide open, and I wasn't walking through it alone. I would build the table myself. The night after Mom's text, I couldn't sleep. The city hummed outside my window, headlights cutting streaks across the Hudson, but inside my apartment, the silence pressed heavy. I kept replaying those 6 words, the blunt finality of them, and I felt that same question I'd carried my whole life. Why am I always the one left out? On impulse, I scrolled through my contacts and landed on Aaron's name. He was my cousin on Dad's side, 2 years younger, steady in a way that always grounded me. We weren't inseparable, but he'd never lied to me either. I hit call. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Lauren, everything okay?" "Did you get invited this year?" I asked, my voice tighter than I meant. There was a pause. "Nope, Mitch's crew only. That's what your mum said. Immediate family this year." The words hit like cold water. I sank back against the couch. "You too?" "Not just me," Aaron said. "Nobody got an invite. Grandma called this morning. She's furious. First time in 30 years she's not been asked to bring her apple pie." My chest constricted. Evelyn cut out too. The one person who'd always slipped me notes of recognition, who had seen me when no one else bothered. The thought twisted in me, outrage layered over hurt. "And it's not just family," Aaron added, lowering his voice. "Pastor Green told my dad he didn't hear anything either. Apparently, your mum told him it was going to be quiet and simple this year." I sat up, stunned. Even the pastor, the man who had prayed over every meal we'd ever shared, benched. My mother hadn't just closed the door, she had bolted it from the inside. Aaron sighed. "Feels like they cut the rest of us off like dead weight, like we don't matter anymore." I closed my eyes, fury humming under my skin. For once, it wasn't just me. The exclusion was wider, crueler, calculated. And somehow that made it worse and better at the same time. Worse because I knew the sting too well. Better because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. "You want to do something else?" I asked before I could stop myself. Aaron hesitated. "Like what? Everything's booked. We'll just end up eating takeout on the couch." "No," I said, the word sharp, alive. "I've got a place, a ranch in North Carolina. Big enough for 30. If you can get here, I'll take care of the rest." Silence stretched. Then he let out a low whistle. "You serious?" "Dead serious." Another pause, then a grin in his voice. "Kayla's gonna love this. We're in." When we hung up, I sat in the dark, heart pounding. My thumb hovered over my messages, and before long, texts started buzzing through. "Heard about your idea. Can we come? Do you have room for us? I'll bring the turkey if you let me crash." It snowballed in less than an hour. Cousins who'd been sidelined, uncles and aunts who hadn't seen each other in years, even Grandma Evelyn herself calling me directly. She didn't waste time on greetings. "Tell me when to pack," she said, her voice firm. I laughed for the first time all week, a sound raw and unexpected. "As soon as you're ready, Grandma." For the first time in my life, the table wasn't shrinking around me. It was expanding. The idea had started as a spark, a whisper in my chest. But now it roared. I could see the ranch clearly, the great room with its vaulted beams, the long walnut table, the fire casting gold on every face. No one at a kid's table, no one left out, every chair a declaration, "You belong here." I grabbed a notepad and started scribbling. Cabin rentals, firewood delivery, catering. My handwriting raced to keep up with my brain. Thanksgiving wasn't cancelled. It was reborn, remade on my terms. Mum's 6 words had closed one door, but I was opening another, wider than any she could shut. The next morning, I boarded a flight south. Asheville's ridgelines unfolded beneath the plain, ridges painted in burnt orange and pine green, the mountains wrapping around valleys like arms. By the time I reached my ranch, the late afternoon sun was already low, streaking the lodge's timber frame in firelight. Tom, my estate manager, met me at the porch. He carried a clipboard and the same calm energy that had gotten me through construction. "We've got work ahead," he said simply. I walked him through it. 30 people, maybe more, descending in less than a week. Guest rooms scrubbed, cabins nearby rented and stocked, firewood stacked, the kitchen humming. He nodded as if I'd told him we needed milk from the store, unflappable. Reliable, the kitchen would be the heart, and for that I needed more than competence, I needed soul. That's why I called on Clara, a local chef with Appalachian roots so deep she carried her grandmother's cast iron pans from house to house. When she stepped inside and saw the black walnut counters, her hand brushed them like they were holy. "We'll cook it the old way," she said, eyes gleaming. "Family style. No one leaves hungry." That was exactly the point. By Tuesday, reservations for nearby cabins were confirmed, deliveries of cider and firewood scheduled. The great room smelled faintly of pine oil and ash, as if the house itself was bracing for company. But not everyone leapt at the chance. A text pinged from Cousin Eli. "Are you sure this won't cause trouble? Mom says Aunt Judy will see it as betrayal." Others echoed the worry. Some feared being accused of taking sides, of choosing me over the matriarch who had drawn her circle so small. For a moment, doubt pricked me. What if they were right? What if this turned into another rejection, just multiplied? I steadied myself, typing back with fingers firm. This isn't against anyone. It's not about shutting doors. It's about opening them. Not a rebellion, just a table for all of us. I sent it to everyone. Then I set the phone down and forced myself to breathe. An hour later, replies trickled in. That makes sense. We'll come if there's room. Thanks for saying it out loud. By nightfall, the trickle became a flood. RSVPs stacked so quickly I had to make a spreadsheet. 3 cousins with spouses and kids. Aunt Lyra offering her famous apple pie. Uncle Ray volunteering to man the smoker out back. Even Grandma Evelyn texted, "Make sure my room has a lamp for puzzles." I smiled, shaking my head. Of course she had requests. Of course I would meet them. The list swelled until the ranch itself felt like it might burst. 30 chairs suddenly seemed like a low estimate. I found myself measuring the great room with Tom, debating whether we could stretch the table another few feet, or if we'd need to set planks across sawhorses for the overflow. Clara laughed when she heard the numbers. "Good," she said, her voice bright with challenge. "Food tastes better with a crowd." It struck me then, sharp and undeniable. I wasn't begging for a seat anymore. I was building one long enough to fit everyone who had been told they didn't count. By the end of the week, the ranch buzzed with preparation. Lanterns polished, linens folded, firewood stacked high enough to last through snow. And my inbox overflowed with confirmations. For the first time in my life, the table wasn't shrinking around me. It was expanding, stretching wide enough for every forgotten soul. And I realized something stunning. The text that had once felt like rejection might have been the best invitation I'd ever received, not to their table, but to my own. Thanksgiving morning dawned cold and sharp, the kind of mountain air that stung your lungs but made every breath feel like a baptism. Frost clung to the fields, a silver veil across the land, and the lodge stood proud against the backdrop of ridges streaked in pale sunlight. By 9 o'clock I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A caravan of cars began winding up the drive. SUVs stuffed with kids and coolers, sedans piled with luggage. Windows rolled down as faces pressed forward, eyes wide at the sight of the lodge rising above the lake. I stepped onto the porch, heart pounding harder than it ever had in a boardroom. This wasn't a deal I could close with numbers. This was my life on display. Aaron's SUV was first. He climbed out, his breath puffing in the cold, and stood frozen, staring up at the beams and stone fireplace chimney. "Holy hell," he whispered. "You weren't kidding." Kayla followed, arms full of coats, while their kids tumbled out squealing, already racing toward the lake. Behind them came Eli with his new girlfriend, then Uncle Ray and Aunt Leah, who hugged me so tight my ribs protested. One by one they arrived, each expression the same: astonishment, followed quickly by something else: relief. Inside, the lodge came alive. Laughter echoed against the high ceilings, boots thudded on the polished wood floors, and the smell of Clara's stock simmering in the kitchen wrapped around us like a promise. I guided them to their rooms, each detail carefully chosen. In Uncle Ray's room, a basket with bourbon and smoked almonds. For Aunt Leah, crossword puzzles and a magnifying lamp. For the twins, toy trucks and gummy dinosaurs. Each gesture small but deliberate, proof that someone had thought of them, that they mattered. It was Evelyn's reaction that undid me. I led her upstairs, the firelight catching her silver hair, and opened the door to her suite. On the dresser sat a basket lined with a red-checked cloth, filled with ginger cookies. Her ginger cookies. She stopped short, hand trembling against the doorframe. Tears welled, unblinking. "Lauren," she whispered, voice breaking. "No one's remembered these in years." I swallowed hard. I remembered. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she pressed her hand to her mouth and cried, not the quiet tears of disappointment I'd seen her wipe away at countless family gatherings, but the kind that came from being seen. Finally, after so long. I hugged her gently, afraid she might shatter in my arms. Her tears dampened my sweater, and I thought of the card she had sent me all those years ago, the one line that had kept me tethered: "You're my girl too." Now I was returning the favour. By midday, the lodge pulsed with life. Clara darted between kitchen and pantry, humming old hymns. Kids streaked through hallways like sparks. Someone strummed a guitar out on the deck, the chords carrying across the lake. Fires snapped in both hearths, smoke drifting up into the crisp sky. I moved through it all in a haze of wonder, every face lit with joy, every voice layered into a chorus of belonging. No one sat apart, no one left in the shadows. For years, I had been the one at the card table, balancing paper plates. But here, in this house I had built, I was the one pulling out chairs, and not one of them was empty. When evening fell, candles lined the table, their flames trembling like the hearts around them. The long stretch of walnut glowed under bowls of mashed potatoes and roasted squash. Laughter rang loud enough to rival the crackle of the fire, and across it all, Evelyn's eyes found mine. They were still wet, but shining now. She didn't need to say a word. The ginger cookies had spoken for both of us. By late afternoon, the long table was set. 30 chairs stretched across the great room, walnut gleaming beneath a scattering of candles. Bowls and platters crowded the surface. Turkey carved golden brown, Clara's cornbread steaming, sweet potatoes glistening with maple glaze. There was no kids' table shoved into a corner. Every plate, every fork, every seat was equal. The family filed in slowly, murmurs giving way to awe. Aaron pulled out a chair for Kayla. The twins scrambled onto seats that were sized the same as everyone else's, grinning like they'd just been promoted to adulthood. Uncle Ray whistled low, running a hand along the edge of the table. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered, shaking his head. When everyone had settled, Clara appeared from the kitchen, cheeks flushed from the heat, apron dusted with flour. She bowed her head, whispered a prayer over the meal, and then set down the final dish. Evelyn's apple pie, warmed and fragrant, waiting to be claimed. Conversation began tentative, then swelled. Stories overlapped, laughter rolled. Hands passed bowls down the line, spoons scraping, glasses clinking. The fire behind us roared high, sparks spitting like punctuation marks. For once there was no silence to swallow me whole, no interruptions to reroute the spotlight. This was the sound of a family alive, unbroken. I sat near the centre, stunned by the scene. My chest swelled with something too big to name. Gratitude, maybe, or vindication, or both, twined together. Halfway through the meal, Eli's girlfriend pulled out her phone. She tilted it discreetly at first, filming the glow of the room, the clamour of voices. But as plates piled higher and songs started on guitar, she streamed it live. I noticed only when my phone buzzed with notifications. The caption scrolled across the screen, "The Carter Thanksgiving, Asheville Edition." Within minutes, comments flooded. Locals back in Indiana watching with surprise, curiosity, even envy. Didn't know Lauren had a place like that. "Looks like the whole family's there. Where's Judy? Best Thanksgiving I've seen in years." The chatter spread like wildfire. The same small-town grapevine that had always whispered Mark's glory was now chewing on this feast, this house, this family gathered without its supposed leaders. For the first time, I didn't shrink from the noise. Let them talk. Let them see that the circle had been redrawn wide enough to include everyone left out before. If it rattled Judy and Robert, maybe they'd understand what exclusion felt like. Evelyn noticed me scrolling, lips pursed. She reached across the table and set her wrinkled hand over mine, pushing the phone flat. "Eyes up, Lauren. This is the moment. Don't miss it." I obeyed. I watched as Ray launched into a story about a fishing trip gone wrong, gesturing so wildly his wine nearly toppled. Kayla leaned against Aaron, laughter spilling out like water. The twins dangled noodles from their forks, faces smeared with cranberry sauce. The room shimmered with firelight and joy. This was what I had built. Not the house, not the food, not even the logistics of pulling it all together. I had built belonging. Later, when dessert plates were scraped clean and coffee poured, Evelyn tugged at my sleeve. "Walk with me." I followed her to the entry hall where shadows stretched long. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for her age. "You gave us back Thanksgiving," she said, eyes glistening. I started to protest, but she pressed on. "No, listen. For years, we've been shoved aside, made small, told to sit quiet. Tonight you opened the doors. You showed us we still matter." Her words cut deeper than any text ever had. My throat tightened, but I swallowed the lump. "I just wanted everyone to feel welcome," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "And you did, more than welcome. You gave us home." The fire popped behind us, laughter still spilling from the dining room, and in that moment I knew Evelyn was right. I hadn't just reclaimed a holiday. I had rebuilt it from the ground up. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Sunlight spilled across the lake, sharp and cold, glittering like glass. Inside, kids were already padding across the floor in their pajamas, raiding the leftovers. Laughter drifted from the kitchen where Clara reheated biscuits, the sound warm and easy. But my phone was not warm and easy. It buzzed non-stop on the nightstand, screen lighting up again and again. 6 missed calls, Judy, 3 from Dad, 2 from Mark. My mother's name pulsed across the screen once more as I stared at it, my chest tightening. I picked it up, walked down the hall to the library and shut the door. The room smelled of leather and cedar, books lining the shelves like silent witnesses. The lake shimmered beyond the window, calm against the storm in my hand. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail again, but then I hit accept and pressed speaker. And Daniel! Mum's voice was sharp, clipped, using the wrong name as if she'd forgotten who she was calling. She corrected herself quickly. Lauren, why didn't you tell us? Everyone's talking about your house, your dinner. Even Pastor Green mentioned it in his sermon this morning. I didn't flinch. You said you were keeping it small, so I made other plans. There was a pause, the faint sound of Dad clearing his throat. Then Mom spoke again, her tone defensive. That wasn't about you. We just thought you'd be busy. You're always working and Mark's family was easier to coordinate. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Easier to coordinate. As if my life was an inconvenience, a scheduling conflict. I opened my mouth to respond, but a voice cut across mine, firm and steady. Evelyn. She was sitting just outside the library door, and she'd heard enough. Put them on speaker, Lauren. My hand trembled as I moved closer to the door so her voice could carry. They're already on speaker, Grandma. Her chair creaked as she straightened. Robert, Judy, do you even hear yourselves? You've ignored this girl her whole life, treated her like a problem you couldn't solve, and now you're shocked she built something without you? Silence crashed down the line. You ever think, Evelyn pressed, her voice rising with a force I'd never heard from her, that maybe if you'd made space for her at your table, you'd be sitting at hers now? I closed my eyes, the words like a balm and a blade all at once. Dad finally spoke, low and muttering, That's not fair. No, Evelyn snapped. What's not fair is decades of pretending she didn't matter. What's not fair is leaving her out, year after year, while you bragged about Mark mowing lawns like he cured cancer. What's not fair is the daughter you pushed aside having to build her own table just to prove she existed. Mum exhaled hard, the sound harsh through the speaker. You're blowing this out of proportion. Evelyn's tone softened, but the steel remained. This isn't about a dinner. It's about who you show up for, and you never showed up for her. My throat burned, but I stayed silent. It wasn't my fight anymore. Evelyn had picked up the sword for me. The line went quiet, no apology, no excuse, just the hollow static of people confronted with their own failures. I let the silence stretch, heavy and unyielding. Finally, I ended the call without another word. I stood there in the library, phone dangling from my hand, Evelyn's presence steady just beyond the doorway. My pulse hammered, but the knot in my chest loosened, just a little. For the first time in years, I hadn't had to defend myself. Someone else had seen, had spoken, had fought. Outside, the laughter from the kitchen swelled. The smell of biscuits drifted in. And I realized that whatever my parents chose to do next, the truth had already been said out loud. It couldn't be taken back. The line had gone silent after Evelyn's words, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but heavy, dense with everything unsaid. My father coughed, the sound awkward and thin. Well, Robert muttered, no sense dredging up the past. What's done is done. Let's just move on. It was his way of lancing the tension, of sweeping years of neglect under the rug, as if they were crumbs on the carpet. For decades that tactic had worked. Gloss over, redirect, pretend it never happened. But this time the weight of Evelyn's voice still hung in the air, and his words fell flat. I didn't answer, neither did Evelyn. The silence pressed harder until even Dad seemed to shrink beneath it. Finally, I hit end call and set the phone down on the desk. For a while, I just sat in the library, staring at the black screen. My reflection flickered faint in the glass, and behind it, the lake glimmered like nothing had changed. But everything had. Then my phone buzzed again, not a call this time, but a flood of notifications. The family group chat was alight, messages stacked one on top of another. A video had been dropped into the thread. Curious, I opened it. My breath caught. It was the live stream from last night, The long table glowing under candlelight, the laughter, the fire popping high, Evelyn's apple pie being passed around. Eli's girlfriend had filmed it, her voice laughing faintly in the background. Someone had saved the clip and shared it. Now it was making the rounds back in Fort Wayne. "Did you see Lauren's lodge?" One message read, "Whole family's there, except Judy and Robert. Looks like the best Thanksgiving we've ever missed." The comments rolled in faster than I could scroll. Friends, neighbours, even the pastor weighed in with surprised emojis and clipped notes of admiration. My parents' carefully cultivated image of Mark as the centre of gravity was cracking. The town was buzzing about the daughter they had left out. I sat back in the chair, phone warm in my hand. It should have felt like victory, like validation. Instead, it left me strangely hollow. Vindication was sharp, but it didn't heal. Another buzz. This time, a text from Mark. Didn't expect that, but I get it. 7 words. Sparse, almost careless, but heavier than I'd imagined. I stared at the screen, unsure if it was olive branch or observation. With Mark, it was impossible to tell. For years, he had lived in the glow of their praise, never questioning the imbalance, never stepping into my corner. And now, a single text. No apology, no acknowledgement of what it had cost me to stand in his shadow. Just recognition that I'd shifted something he hadn't seen coming. I typed out 12 responses in my head, sarcasm, anger, forgiveness, but none of them left my fingers. In the end, I set the phone face down on the desk and let the moment breathe. Sometimes silence is louder than any reply. Outside the library, voices drifted in, children laughing, Clara calling out for help with the dishes, the scrape of chairs being pushed back. Life was moving forward without the need for explanation. I rose, slipping the phone into my pocket, and stepped out of the quiet room into the warmth of the lodge. The air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Evelyn sat by the fire with a puzzle spread across the table, her eyes lifting to meet mine. She didn't ask what had been said. She didn't need to. For once, I wasn't scrambling to justify myself, to chase their approval. I had built something solid, something undeniable, and it didn't need defending. Let the town talk. Let my parents stew. Let Mark send his cryptic texts. I would answer none of it. Some victories are loud. Mine would be quiet, the kind that settled deep, where no one could take it away. The ranch settled into a rhythm the next day, a hum of life that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, catching dust motes that spun like tiny dancers. In the kitchen, Clara flipped pancakes on her griddle, humming low, while children darted in and out, chasing each other with sticky fingers. By midday, the energy shifted outdoors. Aaron led a group along the wooded trails that circled the lake, their laughter echoing through the trees. The twins carried sticks like swords, battling invisible dragons. I watched them disappear into the forest and felt something stir in my chest. It wasn't the ache of absence this time, it was the fullness of presence. On the back deck, Aunt Lia spread out a 1,000-piece puzzle, her glasses slipping down her nose as she squinted at the edge pieces. Evelyn joined her, sharp as ever, snapping pieces into place with surprising speed. The fire pit down by the shore roared to life under Uncle Ray's watch, smoke curling into the crisp air. He stood with Eli, showing him how to coax flames from damp logs, their voices blending into the crackle. I drifted among them all, not as a host performing, but as one of many. No spotlight, no need to justify my existence. I didn't have to prove I belonged here. I already did. The realization was almost too much. For years, belonging had been a battle I waged with every achievement, every desperate attempt to be noticed. And now, without lifting a finger, I had it. It wasn't won. It was given freely in laughter and shared air. As the sun dipped low, Painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet, I carried mugs of cider to the group gathered at the fire pit. We sat in a loose circle, boots pressed close to the flames, faces glowing. The kids roasted marshmallows, their giggles punctuated by the hiss of sugar catching fire. It was then that one of my cousins, Sarah, shifted beside me. She had been quiet most of the trip, her eyes always watchful. She sipped her cider, then spoke softly enough that only I could hear. "You know," she said, "I get it. What you've been through with Aunt Judy." I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Sarah shrugged, her gaze fixed on the flames. "She's never been warm to me either, not like she is with Mark or Becky. I always felt like I was tolerated, not loved. Birthdays, holidays, she'd forget little things. Or worse, she'd compare me to Becky, how I wasn't as polished, not as ambitious. I stopped trying after a while." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long I thought I carried this weight alone, singled out as the invisible one. But here was Sarah carrying her own quiet ache. "I used to think it was just me," I admitted. She glanced at me then, eyes wet. "Me too." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the sparks rise into the night sky. The fire popped, scattering ash like stars. And in that silence, I felt something shift again, not just relief, but connection. We were not isolated failures in Judy's eyes. We were survivors of the same indifference. Sarah exhaled, long and slow. "But this, being here, it feels different, like we matter, like you built a place where none of that follows us." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat thick. That's exactly what I wanted. The fire crackled between us, sealing the truth. Around us, laughter swelled again. The twins danced with sparklers, their light carving circles in the dark. Evelyn clapped in rhythm to their steps, her joy louder than the fire itself. And I realized that no apology from Judy or Robert could ever mean more than this moment. This messy, glowing proof that family could exist outside of the walls they built. For once, I didn't crave their sorry. I didn't need their recognition. Here, at my own fire, surrounded by voices that wanted to be heard, I finally belonged. That night, after the fire burned down to embers and the cousins drifted off toward their cabins, I lingered in the great room with a mug of tea. The house was quieter now, the hum of family dimmed to a low murmur. My phone buzzed on the side table. It was Eli. I answered, and his voice came through, soft but charged with energy. "Lauren, you know what you did, right?" I frowned, curling deeper into the leather chair. "What do you mean?" "You changed the holiday," he said. "We used to show up at Thanksgiving because it was tradition, because no one dared break the pattern. But tonight? Tonight it felt like family again. Not obligation, not hierarchy, just family." His words landed heavy, deeper than I expected. For years, I had been fighting to belong at a table that had no seat for me. Now, without even meaning to, I had given everyone else the same gift I had been starving for: recognition. "Thanks," I whispered, not sure what else to say. After we hung up, I sat with his words, letting them soak into the quiet. They weren't just affirmation. They were a mirror, showing me what I had built was more than shelter. It was renewal. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Dad. "Looks nice. Proud of you." I stared at it, unsure how to feel. 2 short sentences, stripped of warmth, typed like weather updates. And yet I read them again, searching for sincerity between the clipped words. Minutes later, another ping. "Mum this time. We'd like to visit sometime, just us." My breath caught. Was it guilt, curiosity, or just the fear of being left out of the story everyone else was now telling? I couldn't tell. Instinctively, my thumb hovered over the delete icon, easier to erase than to reopen the wound. I didn't want Scrap's half-hearted gestures arriving years too late. Before I pressed it, Evelyn's voice startled me. "Don't." I looked up. She was standing in the doorway, wrapped in her shawl, eyes sharp despite the late hour. "Grandma—" She crossed the room, lowering herself into the chair beside me. Her hand, warm and wrinkled, covered mine. "Leave it. Sometimes slow steps are still steps forward." "But it feels hollow," I said, my voice tight. "Maybe," she admitted. "But think of it like planting seeds. They don't all sprout right away. Some take a season, some take years. But if you throw them out, you'll never know." Her words pressed against the wall I'd built inside. I wanted to argue, but instead I nodded. She had lived through more than I could fathom, and her wisdom carried the weight of decades. So I set the phone down, unread messages still glowing. Later, when the house grew silent again, I slipped out to the back porch. The night was crisp, the stars scattered thick across the sky. The lake lay dark and still, holding the reflection of every light from the lodge. I lowered myself into the rocking chair, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and inhaled the sharp scent of pine. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full, of voices still echoing in the walls, of laughter still humming in the beams, of Evelyn's steady hand reminding me to let time do its work. For once, I didn't feel the need to fix or chase or demand. I simply breathed, letting the cool air fill me. The porch creaked under my chair as I rocked slowly, the rhythm steady, grounding. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt still, not waiting, not hoping, just being. Christmas arrived with frost, thick on the windows, and a silence that pressed heavier than the snow. I had invited them, my parents and Mark, despite the lump in my throat when I sent the message. No cousins, no aunts, no uncles, just us four. A small experiment, I told myself. A test to see if the fractures could hold a meal without splintering further. They pulled up in Mark's SUV 2 days before Christmas Eve, headlights cutting through the mountain dusk. I met them on the porch, my breath fogging as they climbed out. Mark stepped forward first, coat zipped high, his eyes scanning the lodge with a mix of skepticism and awe. My parents followed, stiff against the cold, faces unreadable. Inside, the fire was already burning, logs crackling in the stone hearth. The lodge glowed with candlelight and the faint smell of rosemary from the roast I'd prepared. But the warmth of the room couldn't mask the stiffness of our greetings. My father's handshake was firm but brief. My mother's hug was light, almost hesitant, as if she weren't sure of her welcome. That first night, conversation limped along. We talked about weather, traffic, the view from the highway. Every sentence felt like balancing on ice, careful not to crack the surface. Mark stayed mostly quiet, his eyes roaming the beams and windows, as though the house itself were easier to study than me. By Christmas Eve, the tension had softened but not vanished. I set the table simply: roast beef, mashed potatoes, roasted carrots, nothing elaborate. No performance, no need to impress, just food to share. We sat together, the four of us, at the long walnut table that had hosted 30 only weeks before. Now it felt cavernous, the empty chairs ghosting the air around us. My parents sat close together, Mark across from me. Candlelight flickered between us, shadows stretching long. The first bites were quiet, forks clinking against plates. I kept my eyes down, steadying my breath, waiting for the inevitable questions, the defensiveness, the comparisons. Instead, my mother spoke, her voice tentative. "This roast reminds me," she said, pausing as if testing the words, "of those Sundays when you were little, Lauren. You always asked for corn pudding." My fork froze mid-air. Corn pudding. I hadn't thought about it in years. It had been my favourite dish, creamy and sweet, something Mom used to make only once in a while. At some point, she had stopped. I assumed she'd forgotten, or worse, never remembered in the first place. You used to beg for seconds, she added, her eyes flicking to me, uncertain. I can still see you in the kitchen, standing on a chair to watch it come out of the oven. The room tilted. For the first time in decades, my mother was recalling something about me, not Mark, not Becky, not the golden grandchildren, but me. I swallowed hard, setting my fork down. I loved that pudding, I admitted softly. I thought you'd forgotten. Her face faltered, an expression I couldn't read. Regret, maybe, or shame. She pressed her napkin into her lap, nodding once. The table stayed quiet for a beat, the only sound the fire popping behind us. But the air had shifted, faintly, like the first crack of dawn. For the rest of the meal, the conversation flowed in cautious currents. Dad asked about the lake, Mark asked about the construction. Nothing deep, nothing heavy, but enough to bridge the silence. Enough to feel like maybe, just maybe, the walls were thinning. When dessert came, simple ginger snaps, not Evelyn's pie, I caught my mother's gaze again. This time she didn't look away. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. The roast dwindled to scraps, candles burning low, when the silence finally stretched too long to ignore. My heart thudded against my ribs. If not now, then never. I set my fork down, palms flat against the table. There's something I need to say. My parents glanced up, wary. Mark kept his eyes on his plate. I've spent most of my life feeling invisible in this family, I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Every holiday, every dinner, I was the afterthought, the one seated at the kids' table long after I'd grown, the one whose birthdays went unnoticed, whose accomplishments were brushed aside while Mark's were celebrated like miracles. Dad shifted in his chair, about to speak, but I held up a hand. I'm not saying this to fight. I'm saying it because it's the truth. I worked harder than I knew was possible to prove myself, and still, nothing was enough to earn a seat at your table. It hurt. It still hurts. The fire crackled, filling the pause. My mother's lips pressed tight, her eyes glossy but unreadable. Dad stared into his wineglass, as though the answer might float at the bottom. For once, Mark broke the silence. She's not wrong. The words startled me more than anything. My brother, golden boy of Indiana, admitting the imbalance out loud. He leaned back, folding his arms, eyes finally meeting mine. I always knew you got the short end. I didn't know what to do about it. I let it happen. I swallowed, my throat raw. You could have said something. He nodded, the faintest shadow of regret crossing his face. Yeah, I should have. The table held its breath after that. My parents said nothing. I didn't expect them to. Dessert came, ginger snaps and coffee, quiet comfort, but the heaviness lingered until plates were cleared. We stood, awkward in the candle-lit room, each of us unsure how to end a night that had cracked open so many years of silence. Then Mark moved. He stepped around the table and stopped in front of me. For a moment he just looked, his hands loose at his sides. Then he reached out, took my hand, and gave it a firm squeeze. You did good, Lauren, he said simply. 4 words, that was all. No speeches, no apologies, just a recognition I had never expected from him. I blinked, caught off guard, and nodded. It wasn't enough to heal decades, but it was more than I'd ever been given. Dad came next, extending his hand. His grip was rough, calloused, but warmer than his words had been. Take care of this place, he murmured, as though it was the closest he could come to saying he was proud. Finally, my mother stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around me, brief and hesitant, her perfume faint but familiar. A half hug, but a hug nonetheless. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it was something. A crack in the wall, a thread of hope. Later that night, I stood by the window, watching snow fall in thick, silent flakes. The lodge glowed behind me, the fire still alive in the hearth, its light dancing across the beams. The world outside was hushed, blanketed, softened. For the first time, I let myself believe in the possibility of change. Not guaranteed, not sudden, but possible. A fragile, flickering hope like candlelight in the dark. I pressed my palm to the cold glass, exhaled, and whispered into the night, "That'll do, for now." New Year's Eve settled over the mountains with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The lodge behind me hummed with faint laughter, cousins lingering by the fire, Evelyn humming while she arranged puzzle pieces, but I had slipped away, craving the quiet. The dock stretched out over the lake, wood slick with frost. I carried a tumbler of bourbon, the amber liquid catching stray glints of starlight. Above me the sky opened wide, stars scattered thick as spilled salt, no city haze to mute them. Each breath came sharp, my exhale curling white in the dark. I leaned against the railing, sipping slowly, and let the silence press in. Out here, there was no buzzing phone, no judgment, no comparisons. Just the night, the water, and me. My mind drifted backward, not to boardrooms or contracts, but to that garage in Fort Wayne. I could see it as vividly as if I'd walked inside yesterday. The cracked concrete floor, the tang of motor oil, the battered radio I had tried to bring back to life. I remembered the soldering iron in my hand, clumsy and hot, burning my fingers until blisters rose. I had cried quietly, not wanting Mom to notice, not wanting Mark to laugh, but I kept going. I always kept going. Piece by piece, wire by wire, I learned how to make the broken breathe again. That girl, small and stubborn in the dim garage light, had no idea what she was really building. It wasn't just circuits or machines. It was resilience. It was the blueprint for every fight I would face. At work, in love, in family. She had been soldering herself together, keeping her spirit alive even when no one else cared to. I lifted the glass in a quiet toast to her. "Here's to the girl in the garage," I whispered. "You made it." The bourbon burned warm, trailing down into the hollow ache that had lived in me for years. Except now, the ache felt different, not raw, not empty, just acknowledged. I straightened, staring out at the lake, its surface black and still, broken only by the shimmer of reflected stars. Behind me, through the lodge windows, I could see the long table I'd built for Thanksgiving, now cleared of dishes but still solid, waiting for the next gathering. 30 chairs, maybe more next year. A table wide enough to hold everyone who had ever been pushed aside. And suddenly, the truth crystallized, sharp and clean. All my life I'd been waiting for an invitation, a place, a chair at someone else's table, begging for recognition that never came, chasing approval like oxygen. But I didn't need that chair anymore. "I'm not waiting for a seat," I said aloud, my voice steady in the cold. "I built the table myself." The words echoed over the water, swallowed by the trees, but I felt them lodge deep in my chest, permanent as bone. This table wasn't just furniture, it was declaration, proof that I could rewrite the rules. That belonging wasn't something to be granted, it was something to be created, nurtured, expanded. Snow began to fall then, slow and light, dusting the dock, freckling my coat. I tilted my face upward, letting the flakes melt against my skin. The world felt both vast and close. My family's rejection still existed, but it no longer defined me. What defined me was this: the lodge, the laughter, the firelight, the table that stretched long enough for every forgotten soul. I drained the last of the bourbon, set the glass on the railing, and closed my eyes. The night whispered around me, a chorus of wind, water, and stars. And I whispered back, "This is my table now, and it's big enough for anyone who sees me." When the clock struck midnight, fireworks flickered faintly in the distance. Tiny bursts over the ridgeline, towns celebrating down in the valley. From the dock, I could only see faint flashes of red and gold, muffled booms rolling through the mountains like echoes of storms long past. I stood still, snow gathering on my coat, and thought about the year behind me. I had entered it desperate for approval, chasing scraps of recognition. I was ending it with a rule carved sharper than any resolution. My table was open, but not to everyone. It was open to those who made me feel seen, who showed up, who added warmth instead of taking it away. The door was wide, but the boundary was firm. That was my new law. Presence mattered more than bloodlines, more than old traditions, more than last names etched into Christmas cards. Family wasn't about who you were born to. It was about who sat down beside you when you needed them most. I whispered it into the cold, steady as a vow. The door is open, but only to those who see me. Back inside, the fire still glowed low in the great room. My phone buzzed again, not with my parents' names this time, but with the family group chat. I picked it up, thumb hesitating before I scrolled. The thread was alive with chatter. Photos from Thanksgiving, screenshots of the live stream, inside jokes about Eli's overstuffed turkey. Then a new idea popped up. Thanksgiving 2.0 next year. What if we theme the cabins? Each family brings their specialty. We rotate hosts. Replies poured in. Yes, dibs on apple pie. We'll do smoked brisket. The excitement spilled through the screen, contagious. They weren't just reminiscing, they were building something new, something ongoing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the outsider begging for entry. I was the anchor, the centre, the one who set the tone. And they wanted to come back, not because they had to, but because it felt right. Evelyn padded into the room just then, her shawl wrapped tight, her slippers soft against the floor. She lowered herself into her favourite chair by the fire, the puzzle half finished on the side table. "I think I'll stay a while longer," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I sleep better with that fire crackling. Warms me deeper than any blanket." I smiled, throat tightening. She wasn't just staying for the warmth. She was staying because she belonged here too. Because this place wasn't just mine. It was ours. I poured 2 glasses of cider, handed one to her, and we sat together in the glow. Outside, snow fell steady, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, the fire snapped, steady as a heartbeat. Evelyn leaned back, eyes half closed, the lines on her face softened in the flicker. "You did what they couldn't, Lauren. You gave us a home again." Her words sank deep, echoing the vow I had already made on the dock. I raised my glass, the amber liquid catching the firelight, and spoke softly into the room. "Here's to the girl in the garage. You made it." Evelyn's lips curved into a smile. She clinked her glass gently against mine, the sound small but ringing clear in the quiet. Snow kept falling, the fire kept burning, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something better to come. I was already living it,